Welcome back.
Hey,
Hey guys.
good to
Another
see you.
week. Here we are. Dave, I was
Here we
talking
are.
to, yeah, I was talking to somebody about you this week. All good things. I don't remember who or about what.
Sure.
And I asked a question about you, and they were like, well, don't you know? You talk to him every week. I said, well, if you want to know what we talk about, you should listen to the podcast. It's not whatever I was talking about in that scenario. But anyway, good to be back with you.
Yeah, and likewise. And wish we could see your smiling face, Brandon. But
Yeah, Brandon,
know,
you there?
I'm there. Can you see me?
No,
no,
not sure. Working
may
it
be
out.
having some. We
So
know
so
he's
Brandon's traveling. So it's Thursday the 15th, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which is the time that Dave and I are on. Brandon is on Central Time, traveling today to Texas, fulfilling ICMA executive board duties. And so we've usually record these things in the morning. And if you're a regular weekly listener, which we hope you are, you know that we often make references to like our coffee cups. But I don't know about you guys. I've switched to water. So, because it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I don't want to be awake all.
I'm doing
Can you hear me now?
I'm doing sparkling water myself. I'm trying to
Big sparkling water guy, huh?
it's
Out of a
it's
glass too with ice. Okay, all right.
man, we live the high life here, brother.
Yeah, wow.
You know how
Wow,
we do.
Belfont Borough has taught you well. This is great. So we've recently started posting a different link on Spotify where you can actually see our recording if you listen and watch on Spotify. And if you're watching this week, you'll see that Dave just pulled up what looked like a crystal glass full of sparkling water and ice there. Is that right?
No, I mean Crystal, you're getting a little too that now you're getting into Lower
Little too far.
Marion. Yeah, that's I'm in
Large budget
Belfont,
stuff.
you're
a
talking
little
big
different.
budget.
Yeah,
with,
yeah. That's too funny. How's your week? Good? Anything interesting?
Oh no, nothing too exciting. I mean, we got some snow coming in up here, pretty hot and heavy.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, we're getting the lake effect stuff and have been all last night. So the kids were off
Okay.
school today.
Wow.
Just my oldest son is out fleecing the neighborhood for money in exchange for probably doing a subpar job on their driveway.
I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure he provides expert services.
Yeah,
How about
yeah. Let's go with that.
How old?
He's
Is your son?
13.
13? Okay. Yeah.
And I got an
All right.
8-year-old son too, who is.
I remember the 8-year-old because you were talking about assembling toys for Christmas.
Yeah. That's all done. How about you? What's going on on your side of the state?
Brandon with another message. Now, nope, still can't see nor hear you, bud.
I'm an hour behind, so maybe if you just keep going, there's a little.
You'll catch up
You'll
eventually.
catch up. Yeah, that's how that works. Yeah.
I heard
great.
everything you said, so I'm glad you all spoke nice about me.
Yes, we said nice things about you. We also said, yes, absolutely. So you're in
I'm
Dallas?
in Dallas.
I was just in Dallas last month. Dallas is a large city. What part of the city?
I'm
are
right
you in?
outside Dallas, so I'm at the.
Right
yeah.
outside Dallas.
So it's flat. I don't
Okay.
like it.
It is flat. Yeah. Yeah. I went for a run down in Dallas. I must not have been thinking straight. And I thought, well, I'm in Dallas. It'll be warm. I'm going to run short sleeves, shorts. This will feel good. And I was freezing. I was so cold. I did like 5 miles. I never warmed up. I was sweating. The sweat was cold. I was like, I thought I was in the South. What is happening here?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
started
really
today with
underprepared.
20 degrees this morning, and then it's mid 60s.
Wow.
Mid-60s.
Okay.
That probably
it
feels
does.
good. Brandon, anything to report before we get started here?
No, just flight went well.
No.
Everything is hunky dory.
There you go.
New
Good.
commissioners are sworn in, so they all have
Okay.
new
There we
commissioner
go.
smell, which everyone kind of knows. But
New commissioners know. That's pretty funny. I've not
Yeah.
heard that one before. Dave?
New commissioner smell
Yeah.
like the new car, the
No.
new car smell.
Oh,
Like
I thought you were.
I was
not smell.
picturing the pine tree air
Yeah.
freshener and the
I was saying like, oh, like we have new elected officials. It must
No,
snow.
no.
new snow.
I was going with it, but I was like,
No,
that's
new
weird.
commissioner smell. They all, they're a great group, but they're all kind of.
Heard it here first. Yeah, we'll keep that for another episode too.
Well, they're probably all active listeners to our podcast, Generation on the Rise, and just now know that you said that they
Yeah,
smell
there you
good.
go.
So that's good. Yeah, we got that going on. All right, let's get started. Welcome back, Generation on the Rise. You know the drill. My name's Eden Ratliff. I'm joined by my two dear friends and co-hosts, Dave Frabolka, Brandon Ford. This is Generation on the Rise. It's all about municipal government. We pick a topic of the week. We rotate our host responsibilities, and we spend an hour kicking it around and going there. And at times, when we sort of drill in, talk about generational differences of that topic. As always, the remarks, opinions, and views that are expressed here are ours and ours alone, don't represent any of the organizations that we are affiliated with professionally or personally, just ours. So Brandon, Dave, all good. How are you? Good?
Yeah, man, I'm all
Yeah.
good. How about you, Dave?
Ready to go?
Hitting 26 hard, fast and furious.
There we go. Yep, I'm sure that's true. Knowing you both, I have absolutely no doubt. Like, chosen sort of late last night, thinking a little bit about it. Role models, managers as role models, both internally and externally. Everything we do is scrutinized, right? Everything we do in our organization is sort of viewed by those that we serve with, of course, our teams, by our elected bodies, by the public. And then the public in the informal capacity, right? I mean, we've sort of talked about being a part of our communities in ways that are not directly related to our professional responsibilities. Everything sort of get looks at, right? So when I think about the fact that as a manager, we are role models, I think about that in a few different veins, including that we are sort of leading by example in the things that we want to see in our organization, the culture that we try to promote, the actions that we're looking for, our demeanor, the way that we carry ourselves, everything down from the views that we express, from the way that we go about doing our job, from the way that we go about communicating our expectations, the way that we interact with our colleagues, our directors, the rest of our team, the board, the public, to the way that we sort of live our lives, right? I mean, as public employees who are, scrutinized in the things that we do, both positively and negatively, everything is sort of up for discussion, whether we're a part of that
Mhm.
discussion or not. And the way that we carry ourselves, sort of weaves itself into that conversation. So with that as sort of an intro, managers as role models, when I sort of bring that topic up, what are your initial thoughts? Dave, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I love this topic, and I was so curious about what your first question was going to be. I think there's 100 different ways that we could tackle this one in the next hour, so we'll see where it takes us. But for me, particularly how we represent ourselves outside of our jobs in the communities, whether we're there, not there, anywhere, our social media presence, our influence over others in our professional network, the generation on the rise, how are we trying to do our best to be the shoulders that others might stand on, like that other piece of the totem pole, so to speak. I mean, those are all the kind of thoughts that generates when I'm trying to visualize how our careers integrate with the rest of our lives, and how we serve as role models for the men and women around us, and vice versa.
Those are good thoughts, Dave. Overwhelming thoughts at
Yeah.
times, right? When you really sort of take a step back and think about how everything we do can be scrutinized, how in many ways, as public officials, we are sort of adding another layer to that totem pole. I mean, that's a lot. That's a burden that we carry. I think we're used to it, right? So maybe we don't think about it a lot, but when I think about sort of the younger generation that's listening to this podcast, your whole life sort of winds up on display, right? It's not just during the 9 to 5 hours.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I would like to really hone in on is that that's one thing you don't hear when you're going through whatever program or you're just entering the field is your entire life, right? Not every aspect, mind you, not the private parts, but it comes on display, right? Your social media, you're going to have those residents who will track you down on social media if you have one, right? And they will look at what you're doing, where you're going, and even employees too, right? Like I have employees that I haven't told that I'm going to go down to Texas, knew that I was going down to Texas, right? So
Yeah.
it's the thing to keep in mind, especially for those just getting into the field, that it's not necessarily just the things you share, but it's also the things that you don't share. It ends up making its way out into the universe and impacts our image.
So what can you guys point back to a time in your careers, probably in the earlier days of your careers, where you started to realize that I don't want to say we're being watched because that sounds so creepy, but that you were being observed by others in ways that maybe you didn't totally realize. Is there like a moment where you sort of realize like, wow, like my life, sort of both my day job and then the way that I carry myself and, parts of my maybe private life are sort of on display and being noticed. Have you had that moment?
Yeah, for me, I can probably, if I thought hard enough about it, I could probably even tell you the date. But where I was in a grocery store, and I was getting stuff to make s'mores. So thankfully, I wasn't like getting something that would have been embarrassing if somebody would have approached me, watched we buy. But I was buying like s'mores stuff, and somebody came up to me and just kind of like their way into my orbit and started chatting me up about things going on in the township. Never met the person before in my life, but I'm not the kind of person that's great with faces, especially if I just, kind of interact with them in a passing way. So I didn't wasn't confident that I never met this individual, but finally, like the conversation wore on. I found the courage to say, like, do I know you from somewhere? And they said, oh no, I watch you on CNET, which is in the State College area, is our government access channel that broadcasts all of our meetings. And so I spent probably 20 minutes talking with this person, and I walked away from that conversation in kind of like, I was a little confused because I thought prior to that nobody would watch government access television except for other people that do what we do, maybe gluttons for punishment. And after that, I kind of realized that, it's like Andy Warhol said, we all get our 15 minutes of fame. We all chose to spend those 15 minutes in front of a camera at our meetings, and it just kind of is the way it is. How about you,
Dave? How did that feel? Did you like connect with that? Like, did that change your behavior at all? Like, did it like sort of make you realize that in some respects you're not just like a blind face at the grocery store?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it makes you keep your head on a swivel in public places. Like, we're not quite at the point where we got to put our hats on and like, kind of shrink down into our hoodies, but you're always vigilant. I am anyway, that, the when I'm out in public, especially if it's in the place that I'm the manager or
Sure.
close by. I'm up
Yeah.
here in New York now, so I don't really have to worry too much about it, but yeah, for sure. How about
Yeah. How about you, Brandon?
I've benefited from my first manager was always cognizant, especially given that I was, taken out of the program. I became an intern, got my first assistant job, but it wasn't necessarily in my career in public administration as a city manager. The kind of, being a public servant, I'm going to approach it from that end. For those who don't know, and I know these gentlemen do, but this is my second career. I was a teacher before I got into government. So I taught government and then I went into government. And really it hit me during that career and kind of stayed with me through my city management shtick. But it was when I was a long-term substitute in a classroom, right? And I only had the one of my three children at the time. And my wife and I were walking on the Radnor Trail, right? If you ever did that in Wayne, in Pennsylvania, it's a lovely trail. And we were walking, and I had a bunch of my students come up to me and, just talking to me. And, the very next Monday, they came up to me in the classroom and they started commenting, nice to see me on the weekend. Like I didn't exist outside the classroom. Right. And they made a couple cute saying my baby was cute and all that stuff. And, all that fun stuff. But it was really at that moment that I was really like, oh, wow, look, it doesn't end when you're in the classroom or you're outside of the office. It really, once you're a public servant, you're in the spotlight, not 24/7, but in and off.
That's a good story. And I appreciate sort of the transition there. I'm sorry. So we have day jobs. We're recording this podcast, but it is the middle of the day and I'm at work. I just got a Teams message. Governor Shapiro is in my township hosting an event unexpectedly. Yeah.
That's always
So our police department is involved and let us know. Maybe he's en route. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's happening live right here in Middletown Township, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So sorry for the distraction.
Knocks on your door, bring him in. We'll get him on screen.
I'll give Mike and we'll keep going. Yeah, he's not coming here. He's going to be just up the street.
very cool.
Okay. So where were we? I was going to tell a story. So I was just out of grad school, got my first manager job. I was the manager of Ford City, Pennsylvania, which is in Armstrong County, north of Pittsburgh, as you both know. And I rented a house in town. I could walk to work. I didn't for whatever reason, but I was pretty close to the office. And I adopted a cat, a little orange thing. So one of my employees comes into the office and says, hey, congrats on the new cat. And I hadn't told anyone about this cat. It was like Monday morning. I had adopted it over the weekend. And I said, how do you know that I adopted a cat? He goes, oh, well, I walk past your house all the time, which I don't remember telling anyone that I live there. And I noticed that it's in the window. That's pretty cool. What's his name? And I thought, wow, okay. Like that's kind of odd. I I don't know that I'm sure that it fazed me in the moment. I don't exactly remember the reaction I was having this many years later, but it was sort of a realization of like, wow, not a lot of secrets here. At the time, I'm not sure I realized that was the profession as opposed to the town. I'm not really sure what my thoughts were at the time. And I'll tell you another quick story. I had a pickup truck at the time and I was traveling somewhere. I was a few towns outside of the town that I lived and worked in, and I got into a fender bender. There was someone panic braked in front of me. I swerved to the right and I took out a post and rail fence that was there. So I knocked on the door of this really nice couple, explained, apologized. I said, I'll come back and fix your fence or I'll pay for it, whatever you want. I said, but I have to go. So I gave my contact information and said that we would connect. So they, as we're doing that, they said, aren't you the manager of Ford City? I said, yeah. How did you know that? They said, oh, well, we listen to the radio and we watch, this local television show. We read the paper and you're in it all the time. We recognized you. And I'm like 23 at this point in my life. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so weird. But that's a real part of it, right? It's not just 9 to 5 when you're in the office and the people that sort of require the services that we provide, it is there. And so my question is for you both, as you've sort of had early exposure to that dynamic in the field, how does it shape sort of who you are or who you show that you are, both professionally and then in your daily lives? And then because this is the Generation on the Rise podcast, do you think the Generation on the Rise managers are approaching this differently than how, our colleagues who have been in this industry longer than we have, how they've approached it? And, let's sort of tangle that up a little bit. So Brandon, Dave went first last time. So let's get your thoughts here.
Yeah. So, first off, I have and I continue to craft an image, right? Like how I act in the public view is not how I act at home, right? Like ask my wife or my kids, and I'm a big goofball, right? Like I contain that when I'm at work. I do.
Really?
I do.
So do you find you're like a different person?
Not necessarily.
Like if your friends listen, if your friends outside of the field were listening to this podcast, like how would they react to that?
They would be surprised, right? Because, as much as you want to be yourself, right? Especially when you're being a role model, right? At least this is how I view it, right? There's a level of professionalism that is expected when you're in the public eye. And, when I'm home, I'm a big goofball, right? I am a lot more silly. I'm a lot more, my wife would say immature, but that's not expected in the workplace. Now, does that mean that I'm an entirely different person? No, I still am myself, but I'm a little bit more reserved in who I, show my entire personality to. Now, I will say the guard is a little bit more up when I have new commissioners or new employees. Now, there are people that, like you gentlemen, like I've known you for years, so you could see a little bit more of the more personal side of me than I would normally let out.
I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure that I agree with Brandon, but Dave, what do you think?
Well, I just want to know, Brandon, how you make that happen, because for me at least, and maybe others would agree, I think the harder you try to be somebody different or bottle up a part of your personality or who you are, the more disingenuous you risk coming off as or leading others by. I mean, it's like holding the ocean back with a broom. You can't bottle up who you are. I mean, for me, I've always been kind of unapologetic about who I am and the personality that I bring. Some people, I think gravitate toward it. Some people, it's not really, I think, aligned with, what they expect of me, but good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, at the end of the day, I can at least, approach it from the vantage point of who I truly am and the personality I really try to cultivate in myself and in those around me.
See, I wouldn't use the word disingenuous, right? Like there is a time and a place for certain type of behavior, right? And, the office is not the place for certain types of behavior, right? Like
that's different.
Yeah, I mean, there are, my wife's a New Yorker, right? So, there's a little bit more colorful language that I'll use, with her than I would with a colleague or with an employee, because, that's the language we have with each other, right? It's not meant, as derogatory.
Okay, so you're saying you don't swear in the office?
Well, I'll swear in front of certain people. I think that's a distinction.
I was going to say, that's bullshit.
No. They're, subordinates.
But Brandon, just to not let you off the hot seat just yet, that's not what you said. Like you didn't say, when Dave put you on the spot there, you didn't originally say, well, there's certain behaviors that I don't engage in at work because I'm cultivating an image and it would be inappropriate. What you said was that you sort of hold parts of your personality back because you're trying to cultivate sort of a professional image that you've designed. And Dave's question was essentially like, how do you do that? And he said like holding the ocean back with a broom. I'm not sure if I agree or disagree with what he said, but I am interested in your answer to that.
Well, it depends on the person, right? Like, and it also depends on the audience, you know, call it, disingenuous, call it, whatever. I don't see it that way. I just say, all right, let's take example. I have 5 new commissioners, right? Like how I interact with them and the language I use is going to be far different than commissioners that I've interacted with for years, right? And over time, right, I will take the training wheels off a little bit, right? And I will not reveal, but I'll show and incorporate a little bit more and more up until, I've commissioners that I've interacted with for years that they see my full personality because their personality, I've gauged it internally saying, all right, well, they're not going to be put off by me being a little bit of a prankster or, a goofball,
Goofball.
right?
Yeah.
Like I am more comfortable being a goofball the longer I know somebody. And the more I have already established myself saying, all right, like he's a professional. He knows what he's doing. I didn't know he was that much of a goofball. That's a fun little quirk versus, coming right out the gate and being a goofball from day one. Makes the job.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. You're sort of reading the room and deciding essentially how you're going to approach it. I think I'm fine with that. But I would say about myself, I'm authentically myself all of the time, right? Like the person that you meet at work is not that different personally or in a firehouse or friends and family. Like, sure, like, there are times where you, I think to use Brandon's language, allow your full personality to be on display, right? There's certain types of behaviors or language that are more appropriate in an office setting than they are sort of out in the world, you let your hair down, things like that. Sure. But generally speaking, I think, what you see is what you get with me. I think I also have a professional image and a brand, so to speak, but I think it's who I am. I don't think people who know me, intimately, would say that that brand is distinctly different or even marginally different from who I actually am. And I think maybe in that respect, my personality is sort of aligned and enabled to be scrutinized by the public, and I'm fine with it being scrutinized by the public because I'm not necessarily like vigilant, as Dave said earlier, in terms of is someone watching me? I'm fine if someone's watching me, right? I'm not in a suit and a tie all the time, right? I mean, sometimes it's jeans and a Carhartt, but that's just who I am. But that doesn't make me any less effective at being a manager.
Yeah, totally. And I think then as you clarified your comments, I think I get what you're saying more. I mean, for me, I think it's well, let me just put it this way. Being a good manager can't make you a good person, but I think being a good person or a certain kind of person can make you a good manager.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
It's well, okay, but I think we're going to have the disposition and the character traits that we have. Not that those can't change. We're all different people than we were in our 20s. Then when we were in our 20s, we were different people than we were in our adolescence. But we grow as humans. But that growth, again, a product of all of our environment around us. I mean, that's affected by many different things. In part, it's affected by our professional presence and our need to be cognizant of how we portray ourselves in a public atmosphere. But I think more so than anything, it's the person that we are that we bring to the job, and that either makes us successful or unsuccessful in different applications. But at the end of the day, we've got to be who we are. I mean, for those that are the risers, the up and coming generation,
The generation on the rise
the
generation.
generation on the rise generation, that's tough because at least we, or the three of us here, had the advantage of our formative years not being on full public display. When we became public, figures, I say loosely, locally public figures at least, that was what, that was the presentation that we had. There was, no lives that were on display prior to that. Earlier, the younger millennials and the Gen Zs, they're coming into their professional years having had all of that on full display, good, bad, and ugly.
I guess the one thing I disagree with what you said was that if you are a good person, you can become a good manager. I think what we're not talking about on this episode is like what it takes in order to be an effective manager, which does require sort of technical expertise. I would argue some personality traits and an ability to sort of deal with both operational realities and then informing and executing public policy. We're just talking about being role models, which I think is the behavior and the personalities that we have and the approach that we take to that. So just sort of acknowledging that. But I do think, Dave, that what you said, that if you're a good person, that and you carry yourself well, that being on public display is often something that you can manage. Though I would say that it's not for everyone. And so, Dave, you said that the generation on the rise generation sort of has this advantage of not having our full life on display in our adolescence as we moved into the field. And I think we're thankful for that. At least I certainly am. But so my question is, sort of the older generations, right? Gen X and baby boomers, like, do you think that their approach to this role was different when they were our age, right? When they were the generation on the rise generation? Do you think that their approach was different, based on the technology that was around, the fact that things weren't so published, that sharing information was different? And, how do you think that that's influenced their approach to the job over the years, right? I mean, how were they approaching this job 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as opposed to now? And do you think there's sort of generational differences here?
I would say there are, right? Just let's look at technology alone, right? Like the older generation didn't have social media. They didn't have, for you know, lack of better, 24/7 coverage, right? Like there's podcasts like we're on right now. There is, all different social medias, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that fun jazz. So there's so many different, I guess, some eyes that people can view us from. And that was just simply not the case, a few decades ago. All you had to do was, there was that lone one reporter when newspapers were a thing. Remember when the local newspaper was a thing? And,
Yeah.
that in the public meetings, right? And if you lived in town, and I'm not going to get, on my high horse about that, but if you lived in town, when you were out and about, here it's far easier to dive into someone's past to see, what people did and what they posted years ago than previous generations.
So how do you think that's shaped the approach of the Gen Xers and baby boomers into how they were role models, both internally and externally?
Well, I think,
And
yeah,
remember, those are the managers that have had long stints as managers in some of these communities, which is a little bit different than the generation on the rise community, right? I mean, we more often than not, Dave and I know personally, have much shorter stints for various reasons. So how do you think that's approached that? How do you think that shaped their
well,
approach?
I'm going to tackle that question from the frame of what they should be doing, right? Like they should be cognizant of, things that people have posted years ago will come up, right? Like I've had posts that I've made back in my, early, late college years, come up in conversation, not in my current community, but previously I had a resident who particularly didn't like me and decided to make it their mission to like dig up something, which they did not, because I like to think I'm an ethical, good person, right? But I think
Well, we know where the bodies are,
you
Brandon.
know
Don't worry.
my wife will beat you to it. But I think it's that generation on the rise, and even those who are just young enough in the field to have a little bit left, right? Need to be aware that there's just so many more eyes, and it's so much easier for people to put eyes on you as a municipal manager or assistant.
Do you guys think that prior generations that had their professional years in eras that technology, I mean, it is hard to think about this topic without focusing mainly on technology and how it's evolved and how it's made our public and personal lives, or the Venn diagram overlap has been bigger and bigger and bigger. But I wonder if in prior generations, if it was more difficult or easier to be viewed as a role model, because we now have our personal lives. Those of us that have social media presences also have kind of an avatar of ourselves that we can portray being whoever we want to portray. What you see on somebody's LinkedIn profile and the professionalism and the dedication that they portray may not truly be reflective of the core of their character, because all you're seeing is what they want to put forward. Whereas in generations prior to the advent of social media in particular, but other kinds of technology as well, what you saw was all that you could react to as somebody who was trying to find a role model, somebody to look up to. And it must have been, in some applications, more difficult for somebody to be that role model for others, because you had to walk the walk.
Yeah, I think I'll take the hot take here. I think the generation on the rise generation has a lot of pressure on it in ways that were not necessarily the same 20 and 30 years ago. because everything we do is on display, which is also true in local government now, right? Like people are really dialed into local government.
Transparency is
I
the
mean,
word, right?
democracy. Yeah, right. Transparency is the word. But democracy is a real part of the everyday conversation, in this country in different veins. Local government is on display. And I think that we as executives are therefore on display. And I think with technology, everyone's got a phone, social media, previously existing social media is all sort of a part of the equation, right? I'll use another personal example, right? A firefighter, we know that, right? We talk about that sometimes. I volunteer in a company that borders my township, but is like 20 minutes away, right? Like, my township's big, so is that township. So the station I run out of is 20 minutes. When I entered that station one night, filled out an application, introduced myself. The next time that I came for like orientation, they all knew who I was. Every single person knew that I was the manager of Middletown. They knew where I was from. They knew my digital footprint. Like they had seen me on social media. Like Middletown is very active on social media. Like I didn't even have a chance to establish myself as just a volunteer firefighter, just like all of them. Right. And so now everything I do in that firehouse is a part of who I am, even though I'm not there at work because I have the responsibilities and the job that I do. It's sort of always there. Right. People who I don't even know at other stations on other fire grounds, you know what I mean? Like that's a real part of my life. And knowing, the social media is out there and all that can sort of contribute to that. I mean, sort of we're always on display.
Do you think, Eden, that because you're a volunteer firefighter, that, that gives you a different standing as a manager and as a role model? I mean, does that, and I'm not saying, necessarily qualitatively what that standing might be, but do you think it changes that?
Yeah, I don't know. So I will say I was a manager first, right? Like I was an established municipal manager before I was a firefighter and an EMT. So I think in that respect, it's different. I think it allows me to have a different type of conversation, both with my fire guys, with my volunteer fire chiefs, with all of my first responders, because I sort of get it. Like I understand, some of the element of the operational conversations, right? So when I'm talking to, my career fire guys or my fire marshal or my fire chief, we can sort of jump right into the conversation, right? It'd be like you guys talking about land use or planning or strategic planning or finance. I mean, they're just things at the back of your hand. Not to suggest that you guys don't know fire services, but I mean the conversation is just different. And there's things that I have opinions about. Sometimes that benefits, the firefighters and the fire service here. And sometimes it doesn't, right? Like when we disagree, the conversation's real. And sometimes that conversation gets a little bit into the minutia in ways that it shouldn't. So I think it changes my perspective as a manager.
Well,
I don't know that it changes my standing at all.
let me ask it a different way, because I'm curious as what your answer would be. Let's say let's role play a bit here, and I'm a teacher, and Eden, I want you to come in and talk to my third grade students. Back to the role model theme, and you can either talk about your life as a municipal manager or your life as a volunteer firefighter, but you got to pick one. Which one are you picking?
To third graders?
Third graders.
If I was talking to third graders, I would probably talk about being a firefighter because that's relatable and understanding. Like they can understand that and probably be more entertained by that. I'm not sure if I'm getting to the heart of your question. And I think that there's more that you can teach a third grader about fires and fire safety than you can municipal management, right? A third grader doesn't really care about a municipal
And I'm
management,
sure the answer would
at
be
least in my
different if it was like
experience.
a high school civics class, right?
Yeah, if I was going to a high school civics class or a grad school at Villanova, I would talk about my career in municipal management, local government, the role that local government plays in people's lives, the roles it doesn't play in people's lives, and talk about all that. Like I definitely identify as being a firefighter, but like my career it's not who I am. I think we've talked about that. Like I'm authentically who I am all of the time, right? And I identify as a lot of things before I identify as those two things. Because eventually, like those two things won't exist, right? Like I'm going to retire someday and not be a municipal manager. I will age out of the fire service and I will not be a firefighter, but I'm still going to be Eden, right? I'm still going to be a brother and a son and a significant other and a dog dad and a friend and a best friend, like,
And an
and
all-around
an
good egg.
uncle. Yeah, an uncle and all that kind of stuff, right? Like to me, when I think about who I am, like that's what I think about.
For
I'm not
sure.
sure if I feel like I totally derailed the point you were trying to make, Dave.
No, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, if you ask that third grade student, that third grade class to go around and what do you want to be when you grow up, you're going to get some that say firefighter. You're
Yeah.
not going to get any that say, municipal manager. And I don't know that there's a point I'm trying to make, except that when we think about our jobs, our careers as and how we portray ourselves as role models, we have to think about how we're being role models to those that want to follow in the footsteps of municipal management or local government, and those that want to just admire the things that we do, our characters, our how we present ourselves and how we're involved in our communities. And like I said, maybe there's no point to make
You
there.
So we know that we have grad students that listen to this, right? We know that we have aspiring municipal managers or people who have just entered the field who are, becoming that generation on the rise generation. We've sort of talked about how our lives are on display. And by the way, what we didn't say was we all know that like our behavior outside of work can impact our professional
Yeah,
lives, right? Like if
absolutely.
you, and I know this would never happen to either any of us, but like, because we don't do these things, but like if we went out and got a DUI, like you could be terminated for that, right? Like if you do something that, betrays public trust where your board no longer has confidence in you and is concerned about your decision making and judgment, you can be terminated for that.
Well,
That's a real thing. So my question is like, what advice would you give to that up and comer, right, that grad student who wants to get into this field about sort of being a role model, maybe analyzing, sort of what their, available to the public personality is, and to sort of how they can sort of approach this role and sort of be ready for the public inspection on our daily lives.
I'm going to go back to this creating an image and creating a personality, and the as the kind of had a little bit of discussion earlier in this episode. I would just say be mindful, know your audience and gauge to your audience. That would be my take. And the more comfortable you feel with someone, still be mindful of the image that you're portraying and how it could impact you down the line. And I'm going to add on to something you also said, Eden. For those listening that don't know, one of my duties on the ICMA exec board is sitting on the ethics committee, right? And we often hear about managers behaving badly, as I referenced it, right? And it could be instances in and outside of work, right? I'm not going to go into details because I can't, but, and that can come with, if it's egregious enough, a public censure, which is, your whole board gets notified that ICMA has taken a stance. And, that could not only impact your current position, but your applicability for future positions, not
Yes.
to scare everyone into out of the career, but, be mindful.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of admonishment, I think, that goes along with this question, because you're right, there are some things, there are some points of no return, maybe not that are mortal sins, but there are things that we can do in our personal lives that will carry with us into our professional lives. But for me, I think an important thing for the next generation to do is to seek out mentors that have strengths that you admire, that have skill sets that you want to emulate, that have the kinds of experiences and have the results that go along with those experiences that you believe will make you successful. And that's true whether you're in management and government, in any profession really, but particularly if you're trying to be a leader and not just a manager, you have to think about and be honest with yourself about where your skill set is and where your strengths lie and where your opportunities for growth are. And you can't fake that, but you can find those that you believe will help you polish those skills and grow new ones. And you can learn from that behavior, and you can kind of build yourself little pieces off of that, like a Frankenstein manager of some sort.
Now, Eden, I do want to hear what you have to say on this, but I want to add something to what Dave just said. I think that your whole point, Dave, and I agree with it, underscores the importance of getting yourself out there and networking, especially when you're getting into the field, interacting with different managers. Because, I'll tell you point blank, I didn't know what kind of manager I wanted to be when I got into the field, right? And I've kind of developed my own vision of what I want to be, in terms of a manager and a role model by interacting with my peers and my colleagues and those, who came before. So I would encourage, people that are just getting in and, grad students, network, put yourself out there, get to know people, and determine for yourself, I want to be like, maybe a combination of the three of us, or whatever, but, get out there and experience it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the one thing we're also not talking about is sort of the culture of our communities and what the culture of our communities sort of expects. And I think the previous, I should say the older generations know, right, the generations that came before us, like there were days when there were some communities where if the manager got like a divorce, that
Mhm.
was that was enough to sort of betray public trust, right? Where there was enough questions where they no longer have confidence in your jobs, right? There are probably still parts of the country where that's maybe a dynamic, hopefully not, but where that could be a dynamic. So I think sort of understanding what the expectations are of where you work, who you work for, and the type of community you're in also sort of impact that. Dave, you and I have experience being managers in sort of rural Pennsylvania, right? Really small towns. I won't take credit for what I'm about to say.
Your sources even.
Someone, association who we all look up to said this one time, sometimes in some of these really small towns in Pennsylvania, the manager is like one of the best jobs you can have in those communities, right? And the manager sort of becomes a local celebrity, right? Like everybody sort of knows them. They're really, a part of the community in a different way, right? Like I have 46,000 people that live in my community, right? The overwhelming majority of people in my community, if they all even realize they live in Middletown, are never going to know who I am, are not interested in knowing who I am. And that's perfectly fine. In a town of 1,500, 3,000, 5,000, that's a completely different, dynamic, right? And so how does, Dave, and I want to sort of go straight to you and I'll react also, like, do you agree with that sentiment, that I just said? And how has that sort of impacted, if at all, how you approach these roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think having some roots in managing rural communities gives you a lot of different perspective on managers as role models. I do think there's an element of it that puts you in or there's a more of a public lens on you when you're in a rural community in many cases, just because, like you said, Eden, in more populous communities, you're a part of the fray. And I'm not sure how that shapes you as a leader, how it builds your skill set as a role model or as a manager, but it is different. You're right. I mean, you need to also establish yourself in a different way. I almost think that I've found, like, it's to me it's almost been that in the rural parts of the municipalities that I've worked for, including Livingston County, my ability to be portrayed as somebody who is not sitting in an ivory tower as a bureaucrat, like shouting orders, from the roof at people, probably has helped me be more of an authoritative figure in my interactions with the community around me, just because I try not to be viewed in that way. And I truly don't believe that I am that person. So maybe it gives you different standing. I don't know. Do you agree?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it gave me different standing, but it definitely made me hyper aware that I was under a microscope and that everything I was doing professionally and personally was sort of being analyzed, and that would shape people's views of me. And by in turn, that would could potentially shape their confidence in the government. And I think that's valid, by the way, right? Like if you're sort of a train wreck of a person, and that becomes sort of obvious to your community, I think that individuals may begin to question their level of confidence in recommendations that you make, in the services that you're delivering, and overall the government that you are, sort of the CAO of. I think that's real. And I think in a small town where sort of all eyes are on you, people know you, right? Walking downtown, going to the coffee shop, and you're sort of always on, that becomes a real part of the dynamic. I think that dynamic exists everywhere, but the celebrity status, I think, is definitely true in really small communities. And I think you sort of have to be willing to sort of not reject that and accept it, because it does have implications into the work that we do.
Yeah, I have to think more
Brandon,
about that.
you're the assistant of the group, right? Our sort of token assistant at this point. Yeah. Like thoughts about that? Like, I mean, being the number two, is that different? Do you feel it differently? I mean, how does that play
It
out?
depends on the community, right? Like my previous community, Springfield, 16,000 people, relatively small bedroom community. I was behind the curtain. No one knew who I was, right? But in Lower Merion, as those in the region know, it's kind of held up on a pedestal.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
the I'm in the spotlight on a regular basis, right? I'm in front of the camera. I'm in front of my commissioners. I'm in front of the public. I'm talking to my civic associations. There's a lot more of a spotlight. And I will also say, Laura Marion, the expectations are substantially higher than any community I've ever worked for, which I don't back down from. And to your point, Eden, I've accepted that, right? And I've always viewed the image that I've portrayed kind of leading up to this point where, this is why I did what I did, so that my image and my level of professionalism, when they look back, they can see But yeah, he's not a total goofball, which if they get to know me and I get to know them and there's that comfort level, they'll get to know that.
So let me ask you guys this, right? We sort of have bounced back and forth between the role model discussion internally and externally, primarily with the agreement here. So are there behaviors that you will exhibit with your team knowing that you're a role model? I mean, you guys are leaders, right? So I'm sort of trying to figure out where the line is on things that you will do and not do. Like, do you go out with your employees? Like, do you guys do happy hours together? Do you go to functions with them? I'm sort of curious how you view those relationships, that are professional, but maybe can turn and have a personal edge to them or maybe become fully personal, how that sort of plays out and how you consider that in the context of, your role model status.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are two different questions. For me, I don't have a lot of social, I don't have much of a social life with the people that I work with, but it's only because I try to intentionally divorce my personal life from my professional life as best I can. Doesn't mean I won't go out and, have a drink or, get some dinner or something like that with somebody that I work with or grab lunch or whatever in a social setting. But I also try to do what I can to keep those two lives separate, particularly because my personal life, as are yours, I mean, all of our personal lives are so busy anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we spend such an inordinate amount of time with our teams during the day. I mean, we've got plenty of FaceTime with them. What I try to emulate or the what I try to exhibit as a role model, as a leader in the organizations that I've been a part of is really just showing the team that I'm going to do whatever it takes to make them successful. The old saying, if you're, too big to do the small jobs, you're too small to do the big jobs. I think about that every day. And it's not letting the little things go. It's not, walking down the hall and seeing a piece of garbage and not picking it up. Or if there's paper towels that are needed in the restroom. I mean, it sounds stupid, maybe. I know, but it
No,
has
I
an
totally
impact.
agree with that. Yeah. So Dave, question. So after a board meeting, something good happens, everyone's feeling good, going out for beers, no big deal?
No big deal. I mean, I don't commonly do it, but I don't think it's a big deal. I don't really buy into that. Well, the mentality of if you become too chummy with them, how are you going to discipline them? How are you going to
Yeah.
tell them what to do? I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time. May make it more challenging either way, but at the same time, I think you can pull it off.
So does that change if you have more than a few beers and maybe you start acting, maybe a bit of a fool, you can't get yourself home, getting a ride, all of a sudden you're having a disciplinary conversation with somebody who
Well, that's
witnessed
the
that
worst thing
a few
you
weeks
know.
ago? Does that change?
I said
What's
that's
that,
the worst
Brandon?
thing you can do, right? And that's what
Yeah.
I'll underscore again. You
Yeah.
be mindful, right? Like
Yeah.
one or two drinks,
There's a
it's
line,
a
right?
line,
Figure out where it is. Yeah.
and everyone's line is going to be a little bit different, right? Like if I typically go out after a council meeting every now and then, and I'll have one drink, right? Like, and that's all I'll have because that's I want to be, I want to be.
It's a triple shot of
It's not
whiskey, but it's one drink.
and but I'll have a beer. And for those who have,
Yeah.
you all know since we've been out at the bar, I don't particularly prefer beer, right? Like I will go, towards the dark stuff, whiskey, bourbon, what have you. But there's a connotation with that. So when I go out, I'll have a pint of beer, and that's all I'll have. And I'll add, this, Ian and Dave. But one of the things that I do on a regular basis is, I'll go out to lunch with a department head. I will go out and it'll just be a personal lunch. I'll say, hey, how are things? And just, establishing that, personal connection, right? It's not inviting you over for, a barbecue or to hang out, but it's developing that personal role model relationship between yourself and your department head.
Are you buying?
Yes. I
Does that matter, Dave?
I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer.
I mean,
to that.
it
What do
kind
you
of
think?
sucks if you
Does it
invite
matter?
someone out for lunch and you make them pay for it.
So are you buying or is the township buying?
Typically, I'll buy
Yeah. I don't
because it's not.
think I care about that. I mean, I buy my employees stuff, right? Like coffee, lunch. Like I don't think a lot about that. Do you do gift exchanges around the holidays?
We'll do a staff one, with admin and jar, just because.
And you get everybody a
No,
gift?
we do the what is it the white elephant.
White elephant? Okay.
Elephant.
Dave, what do you think?
But yeah, I get my administrative staff something. I'm not going to
Yeah,
get
I
everybody
agree.
on the staff,
Yeah,
but
you
yeah,
can't do the whole township, whole borough.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can't do them all. But I kind of
I
have
do
my
think there is a line, and I think this is probably debated. I think, it's challenging. I don't even know how to say what I want to say, but like our employees are not our friends, but being friendly is not unacceptable. And I feel like figuring out where that line is. And I think in this profession, when you think about managers and assistant managers, how you can have friends within the association and all of a sudden you become professional colleagues. I can speak from personal experience on that, or that becomes a thing too. I don't know. I think it sort of sorts out, I think you got to sort it out there. I think for me, like vacationing, things like that, like I'm not doing that with employees. Going out after a council meeting, that doesn't bother me. I think as long as it's not an all the time thing, like Brandon said, I think that's legitimate. I think it's sort of like the old saying, if this got sort of figured out and talked about in a public meeting and was printed on the front page of the newspaper, would that be okay? Like, would you be acceptable reading that and that's not going to cause any sort of issues? I think that's a good
And,
test when trying to figure these
I'll
things
share
out.
this quick story because I've struggled with this in the past, right? Especially in my first community that I worked for, Norristown, where I was an intern, right? And I went from intern to assistant to the administrator. And, I will say that I didn't do the best in terms of modeling my behavior as an intern. And I've learned from that, but it made my job so much harder when I became assistant manager because people saw me as, overly friendly,
The
the
intern.
intern, right?
Yep. I've seen
It
that play out.
took a lot of concerted, difficult effort and conversations to be like, yeah, I was the overly friendly intern who would drop and, help you out in a pinch, but now I'm your supervisor and I will still be friendly, but I'm not your friend. It was unfortunate that it was a disciplinary matter that they thought they could get out of, but like, no, like I'm not gonna, sacrifice. I have a job to do.
So I think there, Brandon, and it sounds like you're having a difficult disciplinary conversation, but I think that's where Dave and I benefit, where we are ourselves all the time, right? Like early on in this episode, we both disagreed with you because you said that you sort of cultivate a certain image and that you leave some parts of your personality aside and don't show that. I understand what you were saying. Your explanation made sense. But I think, and I don't want to speak for Dave, but I think being authentically myself, whether I'm the intern or I'm the manager, whether I'm at the firehouse or I'm at work, whether you're catching me in the grocery store or not, like I might be in a different costume, but like I'm still Eden. I still conduct myself with professionalism. I'm appropriate. I'm an adult. And sort of what you see is what you get. It's just a matter of what we're talking about, where I wonder, if that would have, shaped your experience maybe differently. Dave, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure I have them. I have thoughts. Let me see if I can articulate them.
This has become a deeper conversation than I expected when
Yeah,
thinking
it's
through
kind
this
of
episode.
I definitely think that there is an element of, individuality that we can exhibit as CAOs that, and I'm not just talking about manager versus assistant manager, but when you're at the head of an organization, you can be more unapologetically yourself than you can be
Yeah, I agree
really
with
if
that.
you're any other place in that organization.
But I
And
do think the
whether
scrutiny is
Yeah.
more. Like you
that's
can
true,
be yourself, but like you're
yeah,
also open to be scrutinized, right? Like I know I am a fun topic of conversation in the
Yeah.
lunchroom in all the buildings that I have employees. Like
yeah.
I have been talked about all this week because of different things that are happening. Yeah, it's just how it
Yeah.
goes.
Comes with the
Right. Yeah.
territory, right?
You got the yin and the yang.
We're at that hour mark. A couple lightning round questions. We're bringing back the Generation on the Rise lightning round. Brandon, we'll start with you first. Who had it easier, Boomers or Generation on the Rise?
Boomers, wholeheartedly.
Dave,
Yeah, I'm gonna go boomers on that one
you're going to
too.
go Boomers. Care to elaborate?
Less eyes on them back then. You had your fixed time of when you needed to make sure that you were, well behaved. But now it's so much easier for people to dive into someone's past.
The pace was
Yeah,
different.
pace was different too.
The pace have changed, the expectations of the job, the cost of everything. You could write checks that didn't need to be cashed for years, and now we're having to cash them. The generation on the rise.
That's an incredibly hot take, Dave. I think that's going to be the clip we pull for LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
have to be honest. Okay, next question. As a role model, you are the manager or you're the facilitation of a family environment? Dave?
Facilitator. I mean, our job is to get the right people on the bus and know what questions to ask them.
I'll say
Brandon?
manager first, but also you're there to facilitate, but manager comes first.
Yeah, I would say manager comes first too. And I didn't answer the first question. I am inclined to agree with both of you. Our past is out there and can be dug into. Okay. Anything else you guys want to add to the lightning round? Any last thoughts?
I think for the next generation, it's just important to recognize your goals, your career goals, your aspirations, what kind of community you want to be a part of, and then aggressively seek out the opportunities that present themselves to you. The networking, as we talked about earlier, finding ways to emulate the people that you admire. Have those coaches, have those mentors, establish them early and stick with them.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the fit test. We sort of talked about that, right? Finding the right fit for whether you fit into an organization and whether or not an organization fits with you. We're probably going to talk about that again when we eventually do residency requirements. Brandon, any last thoughts?
Even role models can have role models, right? Like it's not mutually
Yep.
exclusive, right? Like even though I tend to be viewed as role model, or at least I like to think I am by others, I myself have role models.
Yep. Completely agree. This is Generation on the Rise. Brandon Ford, Dave Provoca, Eden Ratliff. Tonight, it was all about being a role model as a manager, internal and external. We appreciate you subscribing and liking our podcast, listening to it wherever you get your podcast. We do this every week where it's Generation on the Rise, where we kick a topic around and we go there. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll
Bye,
see you
everyone.
next week.